Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to have with me today for Whiskey Wednesday, Lorne Cousin, who is the National Ambassador for Glenfiddich, who is our sponsor for ScotWeek. And we're so proud to have you as our sponsor. And I absolutely adore you, Lorne. And thank you so much for being here.
You too, Cindy. Nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm in cold, icy New York today. A lot colder than where you are, I'm sure.
It's starting to warm up here, but we will be together in New York next week. And I cannot wait to see you in person, give you a big hug. It's been too long during COVID.
I know.
It's going to be great to catch up. But I'm so happy to have you here to talk a little bit about Glenfiddich, but also, I don't know if a lot of our viewers here know that you are like the most amazing bagpiper.
Not at all. You do.
Oh no, I'm not nearly as good as you. And you used to play pipes for Madonna.
I did, Cindy, yes. In 2007, I toured with Madonna on the Reinvention Tour, and that's what brought me to LA originally. But yes, I played for a year with her on the Reinvention Tour. Yeah.
That is all kinds of fantastic, and you are phenomenal. And I've heard you play many times, and on board the Queen Mary in the Observation Lounge.
Yep.
Phenomenal piping, just amazing. And I can't wait to hear you play again sometime.
You too. You too. We need to get a tune together sometime. Bring the pipes.
We can do that. I had to play a slow air so I could keep up.
No.
Anyway. So, Lorne, what part of Scotland are you from?
So originally, Cindy, I'm from Campbelltown in Argyll, which is the Mull of Kintyre on the west coast of Scotland. I was born and brought up there, and I lived in various places, and now based in New York. Yeah, but Campbelltown originally.
Ooh, that's what tune we should play, Mull of Kintyre.
Yeah, Mull of Kintyre or Campbelltown Loch even.
Yes. Yes, I'll learn both of them, and maybe I can try to.
But Campbelltown Loch, I wish you were whiskey. That's the tune.
That sounds perfect. We should be playing it right now. So you ended up here. You talked about touring with Madonna 2007 and coming to California the first time. Is that when you started working for William Grant and Sons? And did you become a whiskey ambassador at that point?
Not immediately. I was playing bagpipes in LA for a number of years and teaching and doing various music jobs. So really I was doing music for 3 or 4 years. And then I started with William Grant and Sons in 2012, actually with Balvenie, which is our sister single malt Scotch whiskey. So Balvenie and now with Glenfiddich. So for about 10 years now with William Grant's, yeah.
Oh, my goodness, has it been that long? That's
so. Yeah, no. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. I just have a quick little, before you launch into doing an actual whiskey tasting for us, which will be a real treat for all of our audiences. The fun story of you doing the BAFTA whiskey tasting. I don't know if you remember that. And I show up with my pipes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Because a mutual friend of ours had asked me to come and play pipes for the whiskey tasting. And I round the corner and I see you. And I'm like, oh. And I remember I tried to talk you into taking my pipes and playing them, and me actually conducting the whiskey tasting.
Yeah, you did very well. It was great. Yeah.
You lie, but that's okay. You look fabulous. But no, it's really funny. I was like, oh my God, Lorne Cousin. I'm like, we could do so much better of a job playing for you. And I can talk all about the whiskey all day long anyway. So it was very
do that next time. Yeah.
We will. That would be really fun. Anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on here with us. And I'm so happy to be doing a whiskey tasting with you. So
me too.
Please take it away. Do your presentation.
Okay, we'll talk about some single malt Scotches today. Today we're going to taste the Glenfiddich 12-year-old, Glenfiddich 14-year-old, and Glenfiddich 15-year-old. And maybe if we've got some time at the end, we'll taste something special that you have as well. But basically, I'm sure your listeners all know about Scotch whisky, but a quick 101, which is quite good for beginners or people who are new to the Scotch whisky category. Basically, you can have single malt Scotch whisky or you can have blended Scotch whisky. You can have single grain Scotch whisky. You can have blended malt. It gets a bit complicated. But basically, since probably over 100 years, the blended whisky, blended Scotch whisky has been the main drink that everyone used to drink. Not a lot of people realise that. In the old days, it was Grant's or Grouse or Dewar's or Johnny Walker or Chivas Regal. And a blended Scotch was 80% grain whisky and then 20% single malts married together. And of that 20%, there could be 20 or 30 different single malts in each batch. So Grant's, for example, our blended whisky, has over 20 single malts made consistently every month in every batch. It's a very difficult thing to do. So not a lot of people realise that until the 1960s, most people drank blended whisky. That was the queen. But in 1963, Glenfiddich, a very pioneering company, very innovative, William Grant family, they brought out the original Glenfiddich, and it was the first single malt to be exported to the US and released as a single malt. Our company was started by our founder, William Grant, in 1886, and his dream was he wanted to have the best dram, in Scotland we call it a dram, the best dram in the valley. So, along with his 5 sons and 2 daughters, he built Glenfiddich Distillery. Now, Glenfiddich actually is Gaelic for Valley of the Deer. You see the deer in all our bottles. So Glenfiddich actually means Valley of the Deer. So 1886, he did this, and the first spirit came off the stills on Christmas Day, 1887. But what we're very proud of is the fact that we're still owned and run by the William Grant family. The current chairman is 6 generations on from William Grant, which is amazing. There's only 3 or 4 family-run companies left in the whole category, Glenfarclas being the other, and Springbank in Campbelltown. So we're very proud of that, still family-run and family-owned by the William Grant family. But should we try a whisky? Enough talking, let's try a whisky, shall we?
We shall.
Yeah. So the first one we're going to try, guys, today, the Glenfiddich original 12-year-old. This is based on the original 1963, the first single malt ever to be released. So 12-year-old single malt Scotch whisky. Now this is a marriage of different casks. The casks can be American oak bourbon cask, or they can be European oak sherry cask. And each gives a very different character to the whisky and a different colour as well. So American oak is going to give you light, sweet, honey, vanilla flavours. European oak or sherry casks are going to give you darker, chocolate, spicier, different flavours. So this is a marriage of American oak bourbon cask and European oak sherry cask. So let's nose it, shall we? Let's put it up to your nose gently. What aromas do you get, Cindy?
You know, I actually get quite a bit of caramel, maybe some honey.
Yes, that's a good one, definitely. The American oak gives you honey and vanilla and caramel. So this is a very light, beautiful, light, delicious Speyside Scotch. So you're going to get honey, vanilla, and pears, perhaps. Fresh fruit and pears on the nose. Yeah?
Yes.
And let's taste it, shall we? Slàinte.
Slàinte. My dram is larger than yours.
It is. I know. I've got to drink responsibly. I'll catch up with you. Cheers, Slàinte. So chew it around your mouth.
Yes.
Lovely, sweet honey, vanilla from the bourbon cask. Maybe a little bit of butterscotch or cream. Yeah. And then some slight spices, very slight spices from the European oak sherry cask. But the distillery character for Glenfiddich is primarily American oak bourbon cask. So lovely, light, sweet vanilla flavours, which is very distinctive of Speyside. So that's a 12-year-old, original Glenfiddich 12. If we go on to the 14, we brought this out 4 years ago. Again, our Maltmaster Brian Kinsman and the company in general is always very innovative, trying to push the boundaries, producing different scotches, different finishes. So this is actually a finished whisky. Now, I don't mean finished whisky, as in finished, but it's finished in a second cask. So it's American oak bourbon cask for 14 years, and then it's finished for about 6 to 9 months in a new American oak bourbon cask. Very innovative. This is hardly ever done in the industry at all, but it's very approachable, very easy to drink, very sweet, a lot of honey, vanilla flavors, but great for the bourbon audience as well. So people who like bourbon whiskey are going to enjoy this. So it's a great crossover between the bourbon and the Scotch categories of whiskey. Let's try this, shall we?
We shall. Why did they decide to do that with this particular?
Again, to push the boundaries, because we like to push the boundaries of whiskey Scotch making, and to appeal to the bourbon audience in the US. It's only available in the US currently, and now in Canada, but only available in North America. So it was to appeal to the bourbon drinkers, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So again, if you nose this one, slightly different aromas on this one. A vanilla, again, coming through from the American oak, but slightly darker flavors, maybe brown sugar, baked apple, perhaps. This one's delicious. It's almost like a dessert.
Heavier on the spice for sure.
Yes, yep. Let's try it, shall we? Slanja.
Slanja.
Slanja. So delicious. Lovely, isn't it? Toffee, orange, baked apple. Almost a bourbon, slightly bourbon effect to it, and a slightly bourbon on the nose. But a delicious sweet dram. And the sweetness comes from the second cask, which is the American oak. Just delicious, very popular. This is a lot of the time it's very difficult to find the 14-year-old. Actually, it's just so popular. But 14 years in American oak, and then a new cask. The casks are usually either toasted or charred, but in this case, it's actually never been used before. It's a new American oak, so there's a lot of flavour in it. All the other casks have been used prior to this. And the Glenfiddich, we're very fortunate that we actually have a cooperage where they make and maintain the barrels. So it comes from the Latin word cuparis, so a really old skill or craft. So at Glenfiddich, there is a cooperage with about 10 different coopers on it. And now their sons and grandsons are actually starting to come through as apprentices. So we can buy casks from the US or from Spain or from France and then rejuvenate them by charring them, boring them out, charring them, or toasting them. So generally sherry casks are charred, sherry casks are toasted, American oak casks are charred. Different type of flavors you get from different types of wood. But this one is a new cask, so it gives you lots of like bright and orange vanilla flavors.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing the effect the casks have on the whiskey. 90%, 80 or 90% of the colour and about 80% of the flavour comes from the casks. When it comes off the still, single malt Scotch, of course, is clear spirit. But once you put it into the casks, that's when it gets all its beautiful colour and flavour. And this was discovered by accident, of course, like all good things, by monks in the 15th century in France. And they were making eau de vie spirit. And they used to drink it in the old days straight off the still, perhaps with honey or sugar or spices. But these monks put some into barrels and left it for storage in the cellar for a few years. And then they discovered it, sacre bleu, the Scottish French monks. They discovered all this beautiful colour and flavour had come out of the wood and added to the body and colour and flavour of the whiskey. So discovered by accident, but a great discovery. So that's the 14. Did you enjoy that one?
I do. But the 14 is in a cask that is not been charred or toasted, correct?
That's right. It's a new cask, a new American oak cask, so virgin wood that's never been used before. In the bourbon industry, they have to use the cask only once, and then they have to sell them on. So this is a new oak, which gives you lots of bright vanilla flavours. Yeah, it's fascinating to learn about the wood. It's very important, the maturation process, and the good cask management is very important in making good whiskey. Yeah.
Amazing.
Shall we try our 15-year-old? This is a lovely whiskey.
Yes, this is my go-to whiskey.
Oh, is it? Oh, great, good.
Oh,
I'm glad we picked this one today.
I love it.
Our 15-year-old Solera 15, we call it. This is actually goes back to the days of our malt master, David Stewart. David Stewart was only the 4th ever malt master at William Grant's. It's now Brian Kinsman, who's only the 5th. So there's been a great line of succession, and most of them are with us about 20 or 30 years. They serve an apprenticeship of about 9 years. David had been with the company for 9 years before he was allowed to take over. And similarly, Brian Kinsman, our current malt master, learned from David. So they passed these skills on. It's a big learning process. So David innovated this process, and he actually took it from the sherry industry in Spain. The Solera system is based on what they do in Spain, in Jerez, with sherry, where it is vatted and sherry is put in the top barrels, And then each time it goes into the next barrels, there's some taken from the barrel before. So by the time you get to the bottom, there is sherry from the original batch in every batch, if that makes sense. So David said, I'm going to use that. And we have this beautiful, huge, big Solera vat, like the size of your room. And every year, 15-year-old Glenfiddich goes into a marriage of American oak, a little bit of new oak, and European oak. And the barrels are poured in, they're left for a few months to marry together, and then it's bottled from the bottom. But every time we do that, there is still some left from the previous batch. So we've been doing this for about 30 years now. So arguably, there's 15-year-old whiskey from 30 years ago in every batch, if that makes sense. So it's a beautiful process, a very clever process, but it gives you lots of rich body and colour and flavour to the whiskey. So American oak, European oak, a little bit of new oak for some sweetness in our 15-year-old. It's a great sound, isn't it?
Yes, I love that sound. My favorite whiskey of all time.
So Slangeva.
Spongebob.
This one, a bit of honey perhaps, again vanilla from the American oak, some honey, and maybe some dark fruits coming from the sherry cask. Yeah, Slangeva, let's try it.
Slanja. I'm sorry, I drank before you. You know what I like
That's
to
okay.
do with this one as well? This might be terrible. I don't know, but I like to take a little bit of it and put it in a jar with a whole pear.
Oh, wow. Oh,
And
that's lovely.
I put it in the refrigerator for
Yeah,
a
well,
week.
that sounds great, because pear is the original characteristic, or the distillery characteristic is pear, especially in the 12-year-old. So that could be lovely. Lovely dessert.
I peel the pear and then
Cool.
put it in whole and then add the.
Oh, wow, I must try that. You must send me some in a jar.
I will, and then it's wonderful to not only drink the whiskey, but to cut up the pear and put it on top of vanilla ice cream.
Ah, wow, yeah, that sounds delicious.
Or just eat it by itself. Either way.
Yeah. So when you taste this one, you get some sherry notes, maybe some marzipan, almost like chocolate as well. This one, you can see this one's very popular.
Ooh.
Almost chocolate flavor, slightly spicy, some cinnamon perhaps. So yeah, very popular, the 15-year-old. So have you any questions so far on Scotch or Glenfiddich or the category or Scotland? Or
Oh my goodness, so many. We could be here for hours and hours. I have a couple of questions, but then I can tell you, I can ask you a couple of questions our audience, our viewers are always asking.
yeah,
How many distilleries are in Scotland? Do you know?
there's currently nearly 150. I'd say 140, between 140 and 150. Before COVID, there was one or two opening every year. It was amazing. Small craft distilleries across the country, and of course gin distilleries as well. There's hundreds of gin distilleries now across Britain, but there's about 140 Scotch single malt distilleries. The main region, I'm sure your listeners probably know this, but the whisky regions divide up Scotland. There's 4/5 whisky regions across Scotland. Speyside, where we're from, which is a subset of the Highland region. So there's Highlands, which would be the north and the west, northeast of Scotland. Glenmorangie, for example, is Highland. And then Speyside, ourselves, Glenfiddich, Balvenie. So there's about 40 distilleries along the Spey Valley. Dufftown, where we're from, is the undisputed whisky capital of the world. They say that Rome was built on 7 hills. Dufftown was built on 7 stills. That's the way it goes.
I love that.
Yeah, so Highlands and Speyside, that's your 2 regions up there. And then the Lowlands, there's only a handful of distilleries in the Lowlands, 3 or 4 now, and they make a lighter, grassier whiskey, almost like Chardonnay in colour.
Oh, goodness.
Then, yeah, delicious whiskey, but very light traditionally, and it was used for blending mostly, but very light, so almost like grassy, almost like Chardonnay in colour. And then you go west, you've got Islay or Islay whiskey, which everyone knows. You can name me an Islay whiskey. I bet you know one.
Oh my goodness.
You'll know it without knowing it.
Is it Talisker?
Talisker from Skye, but it's very similar in style. Yeah. So you know the ones, Lafroig, Lagavulin. Yeah.
Very peaty,
Very peaty, heavily peaty, exactly. So in the old days across Scotland, peat would have been used for all whiskey making. So 100 years ago, a lot of the Speyside whiskies would have been peated, because peat was used over 100 years ago. But then the railways came in and coal was discovered, or coal was accessible. So instead of using peat to dry the barley, we started using coal, which was neutral, so no smoky flavour. But on Islay or Isla and some parts of the West Coast, Skye, they still use peat. So that's why you get this beautiful peaty flavour for the whisky. And also during the war, for example, if you taste a Glenfiddich or a Macallan from during the war years, they're peaty. And that was because all the coal had to go to the war effort. So they'd start using peat again. So it's quite interesting to see this spike during the war years of peated whisky. But generally, only the Islay whiskies are peated. And then the last region where we use peat is Campbelltown, where I'm from. So Campbelltown, there used to be 34 distilleries up until 1920s. And then a combination of factors, prohibition, the railways coming to Speyside, things like that, they collapsed. There's only 3 left now, Springbank and Glen Scotia and Glengyle. But Campbelltown used to be the whisky capital of the world. It's amazing. They used to say that the captains of the ships used to navigate through the mist or the fog into Campbelltown by the smell of the whisky to find their way home.
Wow, maybe that was true. So what is the peating process? I've always been a little amazed about this process, and I think it's not understood exactly how the peat is into the flavor.
No, you're right. It's a good question, because people think it's the water that's peaty, but it's actually not. The barley is harvested, and then in traditional manner, Balvenie, for example, still has their own malt floor. So it's soaked in water, starts to germinate, and then it's laid out on a malt floor for about a week and malted. So it's almost starting to grow, starts to germinate. But then you want to stop that process. So after 6 or 7 days, it's put in the kiln or oven to dry. And this is the traditional way of doing it. So the barley sits on a grill above a fire. And in the old days, the fire was peat. So the peat smoke passed through the barley and dried it. And that's why you get the peaty smells and flavours from the peat. Now in Speyside, we use coal or anthracite, which is neutral, so you don't get any flavour to it. But the peat smoke passes through the barley and dries it, adding flavour. And it's amazing, it's quite fascinating. You get different levels of peat. So we talk about peated parts per million. That depends how long you've done it and how intense it is. So you could get lighter whiskies, which are slightly peated, or the heavier ones, Lafroig or Octomore, for example, which are very heavily peated. And it's different parts per million. So basically the smoke dries the barley. That's how it does it.
And so do the more heavily peated scotches, are they left with the peat smoke for a longer period of time?
Yeah, it's longer smoking and more intense smokes, maybe more peat on the fire.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very cool. There are some that I really enjoy with the peat and sometimes not. Sometimes I find them very heavy. I don't know. There's people that will only drink peated whiskey.
That's right. I know, it's a beautiful whiskey. And there's also a difference between island peat and then the northeast peat. Oh. So if you use peat from Campbelltown or Islay, it's generally been peat which was underneath the ocean millions of years ago. So there's iodine and seaweed in it. So very iodine, salty seaweed aroma and flavour, like Lafroig or Springbank. But if you go to Speyside, and if a peated whisky that we've produced or someone else like Macallan has produced in the old days, the peat is very different because it's been inland. It's been basically made of trees and vegetation millions of years ago. So it's more like a log fire, drier, ashier. And both are delicious, but just different aromas. So it's quite interesting. People don't realise that there's 2 different aromas and flavours.
That would be interesting at some point too. I know that you're representing for Glenfiddich, but at some point to have a couple of those different types of peated whiskies, just so that we can see exactly what you're talking about. That's fascinating.
Yeah. We did one with Balvenie. It was a peated cask, and there's one called a week of peat. It's easy to say. A week of peat, which is a 14-year-old, and that was using peat from the northeast of Scotland. So a very different aroma and flavour. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. That's great information.
Cool. Slanjiva. Which one are you drinking now?
Well, so I've run out of a couple of glasses. So unless I pour this one and get a new one, I'm drinking the Grand Cru.
Wow, delicious. I'll have one as well. Yep. This we brought out 2 years ago. It's part of our Grand series, our Grand range, and the very Grand whiskies. We have a 21-year-old, which you have there, which is finished in Caribbean rum casks, which is very sweet, delicious, burnt sugar, molasses, dessert type whiskey. It's delicious. Beautiful box if you've got it there. Yeah. So the 21-year-old is finished in Caribbean rum casks, and that imparts some beautiful burnt sugar, rum, molasses flavors from the Caribbean. And then the Grand Cru, which you have, Cindy, is a 23-year-old, and it's American and European oak together, 23-year-old whiskey. And then it's finished for just over a year in the finest French cuvee wine casks. Now, these French cuvee wine casks contain wine which goes on to become champagne. So we get them from a very secret source in the Champagne region of France, from a cooperage there. So 21 years in American oak and European oak, and then finished in these beautiful French fine cuvee wine casks. Shall we try it?
We shall.
Yeah.
This is also one of my favorites. Spongebob.
So that one is, you get baked apple and caramel and pears. It's almost effervescent, isn't it? It's almost like a French sparkling wine. You get the effervescent effect on your tongue and palate.
You do. I never knew that how it was aged, and so that makes a lot of sense. I do love this one. Great. I can't drink it all the time. I think it's a little pricier than.
Yes, it is.
But I wonder, I think a couple of these were actually purchased in duty free, and I always love going through the duty free to find these extraordinary whiskeys that you can't always find anywhere else.
That's right. Yes, there are some whiskies available only in duty free or travel retail, as we call it, and you can only buy them there, unfortunately, but it's worth traveling for, definitely. But you can buy the 21 and the Grand Cru in the US, and we have a third whiskey which we just released last year called Grand Couron, which is a 26-year-old, and it's in a beautiful green box similar to the 21, and it's finished in the finest cognac casks. It's delicious. Ooh. So we need to try it. We'll try that next time, or we'll try that when I see you.
We should. And then we have this. I don't think I've ever tried this before. This Winter Storm. Yep.
That is, you should keep a hold of that one because it's no longer being made. It's discontinued, and it was finished in ice wine casks.
Oh my goodness!
So amazing, very unusual. Brian Kinsman, as I say, the malt master, our malt master, is very innovative, always pushing the boundaries, trying to find something different to finish the whiskies in. So ice wine. So it's a delicious 21-year-old whiskey finished in ice wine casks. Very sweet, almost like a dessert.
Oh goodness! Yep. You didn't just say that because that's the only bottle we have. Right. I don't know if I can get another, and I need to try it.
If it's open, you should have one tonight. If it's not, then you should keep it.
It's not open. Which
well.
I'll never get to try it.
Don't tell.
Maybe I could secretly open it. How long? So, another question that a lot of people ask about: how long of a shelf life once whiskey is open does it have?
Very good question. So generally, if there is plenty of liquid in the bottle, it's going to last many years. 5, 10 years, it'll be fine. Even after that, it'll still be whiskey. If there's very little liquid in the bottle and it's mostly oxygen, it's going to oxidize and it's going to become weaker. It's going to lose alcohol. There's nothing wrong with it. It just loses a bit of body and flavor, and it's called aged or old bottle effect. But you're talking a long time, over 10 years, and it's still perfectly drinkable, but it just loses a bit of body and flavor and alcohol. So you can still drink it, but make sure it's plenty of liquid in it and well sealed. Otherwise, if there's only a little in it, it is going to start to break down slightly, but still perfectly drinkable and perfectly safe. Maybe not. If it's 100 years and it's been found under the ice, like Shackleton or one of these, that might not be so safe. But
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
Well, so if it's down, for instance, if the whiskey's down to here now, I should go ahead and quickly finish the rest just to save it from
Yes,
itself.
I would say so. Definitely recommend that.
When you say make sure it's sealed up really nice, is there anything you do? I don't know if this is ridiculous of me to do this or not, but once in a great while, I'll actually apply some plastic to
Well,
and then push that in. When I know
yes.
I'm not going to be opening it for quite a while, I usually do that. Is that good to do or is that silly?
No, I thought you were going to say you wet the cork but if you're keeping the cork sealed, it's the same thing because especially if you're in the desert, Las Vegas or Arizona,
Yes.
the corks will dry out. So I have seen bottles of whiskey where the corks will dry out or break because of the dry, hot temperatures. Not in Scotland, obviously, where it's cold and damp everywhere. We don't have that problem. But you might in Las Vegas. So my grandaunts and grandmother used to, when they opened a bottle of whiskey, they used to go like that to wet the cork. And even 20 years later, when it was screw tops, she still did the same thing out of force of habit. And my uncle used to say, why do you do that? I said, I don't know. But because in the old days, they used to have to do that to keep the cork wet. So you might want to do that every so often.
How fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't think this one will last very much longer.
No.
What do you have a favorite of the Glenfiddich? And then overall, I know that, is it okay for you to say if you have a favorite? I know that you were brand ambassador for Balvenie for a number of years, and you've gifted to me in the past something that I never had before. You gave me about my first bottle, and then I enjoy regularly is the monkey shoulder.
Oh yes, great. Oh cool, that's right, I remember. I think it depends on your mood or what you have been drinking recently, so it's good always to mix it up and do something different. At the moment, I do love our 14-year-old. And people think you have to like the oldest whiskey. Not necessarily. You might prefer the 12 or the 14 or the 15 or the 18. That's great. At the moment, I love our 14-year-old. It's amazing. It's just, and it's almost beyond whiskey. It's almost not like a single malt. I love our 14-year-old Glenfiddich. I love our Balvenie 12 double wood.
Oh yes.
That's one of my favorites. It's 12-year-old Balvenie finished in Oloroso sherry casks. It's lovely. And I love the Balvenie 21 portwood, which is delicious also. It's finished obviously in a port cask. Other whiskies, I do like Springbank from my hometown, so I have to say that, I'll be in trouble. Any of the Springbank, they're beautiful whiskey. They're slightly peated, but almost more maritime, like we're saying with the seaweed and the salty notes, but delicious whiskey. But and then the Grand Couron, I should say this because we have just released it. Delicious. Excuse me.
Oh no, please. And I know, I'm so jealous. I know that you are leaving for Scotland tomorrow.
Yes, I am. So I'll be back in wet and windy and cold Scotland for a week, and then back to New York for Tartan Day on the 9th, isn't it? Scotland Week, Tartan Day.
Yeah, and actually we'll be filming and broadcasting live from Tartan Week in New York City, and we will see you there. That's going to be so much fun. But I do wish you had room in your suitcase to take me back to Scotland.
I know. We'll do that next time. And you bring your bring your bagpipes.
We're going in August for almost the entire month of August. We're going on the road. It's going to be great fun. And I want to get over to the Glenfiddich distillery. I've never been. And
we'll arrange that for you. Yeah, definitely. You can see Glenfiddich and Balvenie. We'll get you to do a nice tour. Yeah.
Thank you. And in the meantime, if you see anything in the duty free that's new,
right,
bring it to New York.
I'll grab it for you. Yeah.
Yes, please do. Lorne, thank you so much. How can people follow Glenfiddich and follow you and follow what you're doing and where you're going to be and learn more about some of the new whiskeys that are coming out and just keep up with you?
Yes, great. Our US handle, if you like, is at Glenfiddich US on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So at Glenfiddich US. And I'm at Lorne Cousin, Lorne Cousin. Quite simple. But yeah, we'd love to meet some of your listeners, and hopefully we'll see some some of you guys at Tartan Week or some of the Highland Games or Scottish festivals around the US. So hopefully see you there.
We really appreciate you being on here with us today. We love to do Whiskey Wednesday for ScotWeek, and thank you so much for supporting us. We greatly appreciate you. I cannot wait to see you again in person. A lovely whiskey and a lovely friend.
Cheers. You too, Cindy.
Thank you so much for being here.
Slàinte mhath, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
Bye. Bye.